Herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe von Crop FM. Der Titel der heutigen Sendung ist The Unexplained und mein Studiogast am Telefon ist Moulton Howe. Und wie immer gibt es den Cropcom, mit dessen Hilfe sich Hörer dieser Sendung live im Gespräch beteiligen können. Erreichbar über die Website von Crop FM, crop.nur.at, kein www davor, und dann oben auf Cropcom klicken. Wir sehen diesen Chat im Studio hier ein und gehen auf Fragen und Kommentare ein. Moulton Howe graduierte an der Stanford University mit einem Master Degree in Communications. Für ihre Arbeit erhielt sie zahlreiche Auszeichnungen und war mehrmals für den Emmy nominiert. Linda behandelt vor allem grenzwissenschaftliche Themen. Ihre Dokumentationen Fire in the Water, Radioactive Water und A Strange Harvest sowie Radiobeiträge auf Dreamland und Coast to Coast sind bahnbrechend in Bereichen wie Tierverstümmelung, dem UFO-Phänomen und Kornkreisen. Aktuelle Berichte sowie weitere Hintergrundinformationen sind auf Lindas Website nachzulesen. And here she is, live from Philadelphia, Moulton Howe. Let's just jump right into it. We met this year on the Crop Circle conference in Glastonbury, and what were your impressions about this year's Crop Circle season? It wasn't that spectacular as most of us would have expected it, but nevertheless there were some very wonderful formations. So what's your impression about it?
There were two things that are residue with me. One is the amount of aggressive military activity in the fields in Wiltshire this year. There have been in the past, but this is the first time that any of us have seen so many Apaches, which are basically war machines, and I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me. The second point is that there were some extraordinary formations this year, especially I'm thinking of Ogburn St. George, the North Down patterns that extended to Morgan's Hill, and that the people studying the geometries of patterns such as Bert Janssen and Andreas Mueller and others were convinced that this year the phenomenon on the truly mysterious formations were trying to make people look at the landscape, at the geography, at the alignments. And when we began doing that, looking at alignments of some of the spectacular formations on the maps, we began to find that some of the most important formations in Wiltshire, for example, were lined up on a very straight line, or they were on a line that was absolutely perpendicular to that straight line. And thinking in terms that there is an intelligence, a profound intelligence behind the truly mysterious crop circle phenomena that has nothing to do with the people who, for whatever their reasons, go out and try to make these patterns in the dark. Let's concentrate for a moment on the fact that for at least 14 years in the modern age of crop formations, that there is something that is described by the astronomer and mathematician Gerald Hawkins himself after studying the geometries of patterns in the 1990s. He said, we are dealing with a profound intellectual profile, meaning that there is an intelligence behind some of these patterns that does not seem to fit just human knowledge. Now, starting there and thinking, what is it the governments might know? Governments in the United States, governments in Austria, governments in Britain. What might they know about what is behind the crop formations that they are keeping from the general public? And would that knowledge explain why there is so much aggressive helicopter action, inexplicably aggressive, in the gentle and peaceful crop fields of Wiltshire, a place that has been devoted to growing crops and raising animals for more than 2,000 years. Now, I'll start by telling you what happened to me in my very first hours in Wiltshire this year on August 29th. It still shocks me as I remember it. I had been at the Glastonbury conference where you and I had met. And the day after the conference, I went exploring. I had no itinerary. There was not a single person in the world who knew where I was or where I would be or what I was doing, including myself. I was on a free-floating, just see where events take me. And on Tuesday morning, August 29th, at about 9:30 in the morning, I had set out for the East Field just to see what was happening. And as I approached the East Field, there were small helicopters coming from Picket Hill around Woodborough over the East Field and going toward West Stowell. And I had seen that kind of operation by helicopters before on a day when 7 of us at the end of the day into the night back in 2000, we had seen this extraordinary pulsing, jumping light in the East Field. So now I'm seeing a similar kind of helicopter activity on the morning of the 29th, and I thought, I'm going to head to Woodborough Hill, and I'm going to climb it so that I can get I can get a really good view on whatever this helicopter activity is. So I drove over to the Woodborough Church, and when I got there, the skies were silent again. I couldn't see or hear any helicopters. So I had never been inside that church and decided that I would go in this beautiful, wonderful Woodborough Church that is at the end of a path that everyone uses to walk about a half a mile to get to the bottom of Woodborough to climb the famous Woodborough Hill. So I went into the church, and I was looking at the beautiful stained glass windows and other art in the church, and I was in there for maybe 10 minutes or so, and I walked out of the church door, was reaching the gate, which was only about 25 feet from the front door of the church, when it seemed like out of nowhere came this huge, loud roar of a helicopter, and my head jerked, and right above me, not more than 300 feet, was a solid black Apache with its gun ports bristling. The windows were completely black. Couldn't see anything inside, but it was very close. And I had my Nikon 35mm single reflex camera was slung over my right shoulder, and I grabbed it out of instinct, and I got 4 photographs of this war machine whirling above me. And I, in fact, did articles at my website, earthfiles.com, about this August 29th event. And if you go to www.earthfiles.com on the
Which
internet,
is linked up,
you will come to the headlines page, and all you have to do is scroll down to August 29th, and there is a hot link to Part 1, Why Do Military Helicopters Focus on Crop Formations? Well, making the story even more extraordinary, why is it that this black military machine would have focused on me, turning above me right after I walked out of the church in a private little village in Wiltshire? It was only a day later that I talked with Andy Buckley. He is a graphics computer artist who has been in Manchester and has been spending an increasing amount of time down in Wiltshire because he is convinced that the Ministry of Defense in England, working with United States intelligence and military operatives, are on a program to monitor through some kind of frequency technology what he says that a source of his inside of the MOD told him off the record, that they are in fact monitoring and going after and chasing an invisible energy. Now that is the way Andy described it, an invisible energy, invisible to the human eye, excuse me, but not invisible to infrared and other technologies that military use to see in the night and to see in other frequencies. And in fact, Andy told me that his MOD source used the number that 95% of what they were going after in the fields in England were invisible to the human eye. Well, what are these energies? They are clearly linked to the mysterious lights that have been videotaped for the last 10, 14 years, going all the way back to 1990, when Steve Alexander and others were able to videotape these bright, very small, no bigger than about 6 inches, bright lights, or as Steve Alexander said, flickering brightnesses, not structured craft, but something of an energy system. And you take that question and you jump to where I was 1 year ago in August of 2002. I was in Norway with some astronomers, astrophysicists, and engineers. The astronomers and astrophysicists were from Italy. The engineers were from Norway. And the group research project was in Hessdalen in Norway. Now, Hessdalen, this little tiny valley, has about year-round, only 300 people live there. And over the last 300 or 400 years, Hessdalen's biggest claim to fame were all of the minerals, iron, sulfur, copper, gigantic slabs of quartz. We're talking about our climbing around on the tops of absolutely barren, no trees at all, mountaintops that had huge slabs of quartz, maybe 25 feet long, maybe 10 to 15 feet wide, maybe 5 or 6 feet high, just jutting right out of the rock and the soil of these mountains that surround this little valley of Hessdalen, Norway. And what happens in that valley? Well, for a very long time, people have reported seeing small, strange, mysterious lights that split in two, sometimes split into 3 and 4, move around in the valley, or only flicker, like Steve Alexander's object, only flicker, sometimes only for a short period of time. Sometimes people, the scientists 2 or 3 years ago were able, with a spectra on a technology that they were using, they were able to measure the heat that was being given off by one of these lights over a period of 2 hours. They wrote up in an official scientific report that they could not understand what would this be that could sustain that kind of temperature for a long time without there being any apparent structure. And the hypothesis that they came up with was that these mysterious lights, and this is quoting from the scientific paper, are thermal plasmas of unknown origin. Well, are these thermal plasmas of unknown origin that were studied in Hessdalen, are they the same as these strange, mysterious lights linked to crop formations? And if so, who put together or made or set in motion thermal plasmas of unknown origin in the cereal crop fields of this planet?
Can you hear me, Linda? Oh. Okay. I just tried another thing, but it doesn't work out, so I have to switch back. When you say that those crop formations are not visible to the human eye, how do you...
The energies.
So...
Crop formations not being visible, talking about is tracking.
Okay, I'm sorry. The energy systems. If you say they're not visible to the human eye, which devices do you think they use to actually detect them?
Without any question, they are using infrared. In that Apache helicopter that turned over me, my brother is an expert in helicopters, teaches and trains people to fly every helicopter there is. And I sent him the photographs of the Apache that had flown over me. And he, in fact, identified the strange, almost upside-down top or knob at the top of the helicopter as being the unit in which they look and videotape in infrared.
So you think that... and what do you think is the purpose of monitoring those? Do you think that that the government or whoever does this monitoring regards this as a threat, or is it just curiosity? What do you think is their motivation?
Andy Buckley and I, when I was interviewing him for one of my reports at Erstfiles.com, he speculates that what the governments are trying to do is to interfere consistently with the ability of whatever these energy systems are so that they cannot make crop formations. I think that Andy might go so far as to even wonder if this year is the reason why there were no more crop formations after August 10th in England, especially when August 10th to August 15th in all previous years there has been some spectacular formation. And everything stopped after the molecule at North Down on August 10th. Is it possible that the reason why there was not any dramatic crop formation in England after August 10th because of all this aggressive military helicopter activity in the fields? The last night that I was in England, before my plane left on August 17th, on the night of the 16th, I was at Woodborough with some other people, and when I left because I had to go and pack to get to London, as we were coming down off of Woodborough, here came another very strange helicopter, and it flew over to the field, which is near a hill called Picket Hill, which is right next to Woodborough Hill. There was still a beautiful wheat field between Picket and Woodborough. Everybody was wondering if a crop formation was going to come into that field. And this helicopter hovered low to the ground over the field near Picket Hill for several minutes, putting a white beam down into the field. There's nothing else there. There are no houses. There are no animals. There is nothing where that helicopter was except wheat.
So you think that it is proven that crop circles are made by these phenomena through the use of plasma thermal effects?
No, I'm not certain I'm understanding what you're saying because of the Austrian accent in English. If you're asking me, is anything proved? Is that what you're asking me?
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. So
nothing is proved. What I'm trying to describe for you today is my own eyewitness experience, Andy Buckley's own experience, which he had, and we haven't gone into detail, also with Apache helicopters this summer that was very dramatic, and raising the question in light of the fact that Andy Buckley has talked with an inside source at the Ministry of Defense in England who has said that they do have a program in which they are using helicopters to actively go after energy systems in which the MOD source said 95% of what they were going after was invisible to the human eye. That doesn't prove anything to the world. It is a insider's comment to a man who has had his own experiences with helicopters and is trying to understand why there are so many military helicopters focused on crop formations.
Dr. Levengood has and his investigations have shown that crop formations are always show signs of plasma interaction, and isn't that another sign that this really might be the cause for some of the formations?
It's an excellent question. I have been working with biophysicist W.C. Levengood since around 1993. And over this period of time, the 10 years, as he has examined literally by now probably thousands of plant stems and so much soil and other physical evidences from crop formations around the world, not just in the United States, and who has written some brilliant published papers published in Physiologia Plantarum and other respected journals. And his hypothesis is that working backwards from the soil and the biochemical and biophysical effects on the plants, that a spinning plasma vortex is involved. That is the mechanism which is transferring energy to the fields, and that the spinning plasma vortex contains other energies, including microwave frequencies, which he thinks that the microwave component is what is heating the water up in the growth nodes of the cereal crops and causing in some of the formations, not all, but some of them, explosions, literal explosions of water heated up to such an extent inside of the growth nodes that the water breaks out of the growth node tissue, leaving holes. This is one of the probably the more outstanding biophysical pieces of evidence that has been consistently found in some of the truly mysterious crop formations. Now, what is the $64 million question that biophysicist Levengood and I and everybody else would like to have answered is, if spinning plasma vortices are the mechanisms, the energy transfer mechanisms interacting with the crop, what is it that puts the plasma into a spinning vortex in the first place? None of us know.
Another question, I guess, would be, how can this interaction with the crop, with spinning plasma vortexes, produce those patterns?
Well, you're going into the next really mysterious part of all of this. Biophysicists and meteorologists, they both have a kind of area where they both would say that spinning cyclonic energy systems in the atmosphere can end up producing circles in grass or cereal crops or soil or snow. But to make something like the 1996 Julius set at Windmill Hill that spanned 1,000 feet with 496 circles, or the incredible 787-foot diameter Milk Hill of a couple of years ago that had 409 circles and was a perfect circular geometry from the air in photographs, even though the Milk Hill field was slanted and it was hugely undulating, something was able to compensate and make perfect circular geometry. Those formations cannot be explained by some kind of meteorological spinning phenomena. And when you look back into the early 1990s, and Terence Meaden was trying to explain crop formations as a sidebar of meteorological phenomena that had not been studied, the problem was that, and why Terence Meaden's hypothesis did not last, but for just a short time in discussion, is because when biophysicist Levengood and others in Holland and Germany and other places later began studying the soil and the plants, they were finding, in Dr. Levengood's perspective, he was finding fundamental changes in the mitochondria of the cells of the plants inside of some formations And those changes in the mitochondria, which are the little energy-producing organelles in everything's cells, all plant cells, animal cells, your cells, these little energy-producing organelles were affected the same way from crop formation to crop formation. It didn't matter what country. And that really gave Dr. Levengood pause, because for there to be the same kind of data from plant to plant, county to county, state to state, country to country, around the world, it said to him that some kind of outside energy was interacting with that plant and all these plants in such a way that it was producing the same almost debilitating impact on the mitochondria's ability to produce energy. That's one of the most significant findings, I think, in all the physical data.
There have been several films circling around about those lights interacting with the crop, which, to my knowledge, were then turned out to be faked. Do you know of any evidence that has not been proved to be faked that shows those light phenomena interacting with the crop?
Absolutely. This is the work of the physicist Elcho Hasselhoff, who did the examination of the oval crop formation in the field behind the home of Robert van der Broeke in Holland about 5 years ago. Now, Robert van der Broeke is a very interesting story because in the mid-1990s he was a young fellow in his teenage years, and he had been out riding his bicycle. This is the first event. And he saw approaching him what he said were dozens, literally dozens of lights. And some of the lights were rotating around each other, revolving around each other. And that the lights varied from approximately the size of ping pong balls up to softballs, so that not all of the lights coming at him were the same size. He was on his bicycle. It was noontime, sunny, right in the middle of the day. The only thing he knows that he can remember is that all of these small lights approached and began to circle him on his bicycle. The next thing that he knew is that he is waking up, his bicycle is on the ground, he is on the ground, and he is laying in the center of a perfect circle that was in crop. Now, since that time, in the mid-1990s, Robert van der Broeke has watched from the balcony of his bedroom in the two-story house where he lives with his parents. There's a big field that runs right up to the back of the house, and he has watched as a light has come into that field while he's been watching. He has seen the light expand. It has gone from a small light to about the size of a football, and then each end of the football has continued to expand to about 30 feet. And on the night that he saw this occur, he thought that he saw what we would call bolts of electricity coming down from below this big circle of light. These kinds of bolts of electricity went down into the crop, and then, bang, the crop went down. This is the very oval that the physicist Elcho Hasselhoff went to. And he worked meticulously with some people who went there to help him. He drew, and I've seen these sketches, he drew the direction in a north-south, east-west grid of every single one of the downed plants in that oval. And the oval was only about 21 feet long and a little, not quite as wide, and therefore it wasn't a perfect circle. It was more of an oval. And because it was not so big that they could not do this kind of detailed work, when he fed all of these north, south, east, west angles into a computer, and they crunched numbers with the idea, could they have the computer produce for them what would be the size and how far from this oval in the crop would the energy have to be to produce all of these stems laying exactly as they were in the oval. And Elcho Hasselhoff has produced a book and a paper that went into a journal about all of this work, and the bottom line was that the computer said that the energy would have come from an object that was approximately 6 to 12 inches in diameter, emitting X amount of energy from a position that would be about 23 feet above the crop. So there is a large piece of hard data that goes directly to the eyewitness who described seeing crops go down. The oval was there in the field. A physicist comes in, does examination, and those crops also, they had exactly the same kind of biophysical and biochemical impacts throughout that oval in the plants that biophysicist Levengood in Michigan has reported now for 10 years. So I think that work, combined with many other eyewitness testimonies over the years by people who weren't able to videotape and they didn't have a physicist come in, but I have interviewed probably a dozen people in England and Canada and the United States who have seen lights come into fields where they've actually seen crop go down.
So obviously there is something that tries to communicate with those people through this medium, or maybe this medium is this something itself. What do those people who are contacted or who have these experiences think that these entities or this intelligence wants, or what do they think that the intentions of this intelligence are?
Well, first of all, I would have to clarify what you just said to me in English, as I'm hearing it in American English ear. No one that I know has ever described any attempt at all by any of these lights to communicate. It's only been observations of lights over a crop field where crops have gone down. It's not communication to the observer. It's the observers have watched these lights where crops have gone down. To me, that's a big distinction.
Sure. And
to go on to answer the second part of what you said, one of the biggest mysteries about crop formations right from the beginning has been, what are they? Why are these patterns being put down in wheat and rye and barley and oilseed rape and so forth if nobody understands what they are? And then mathematicians come along and find that there are repeating diatonic ratios, and they discover geometries that aren't in academic texts that have grown out of a couple of these formations when they've studied them. And you get to the other issue that in some of the formations, they seem to be indicating that whatever made the formation has profound knowledge about our very, very ancient past. Why would something be putting down in a wheat field in Barbary Castle in England, as happened a few years back, that was a perfect depiction of a Hebrew menorah, and yet when a Hebrew lawyer saw the aerial photograph of this menorah, he was so shocked he called me on the phone and he said, "Linda, no one has made menorahs like this since around 3 A.D. in Capernaum in the Middle East." And he sent me a book showing me the evolution of menorahs over the last 2,000 years, and you can read it for yourself. The shape of the pattern of the menorah at Barbary Castle was not like any menorahs being made in the modern world. Why did why was an ancient pattern that would go back 2,000 years, why was that specific shape put in a field? These are part of the mysteries that baffle all of us, because I don't know anyone who understands crop formations beyond saying that there definitely seems to be mathematical consistencies in the ones that are truly mysterious that you can recognize from formation to formation. Certain geometries seem to be repeated over and over again. There have been many formations that have focused around the fractal, which is a brand new science of just the last 20 or 30 years on the Earth. The issue of that which looks like chaos actually has eerie mathematical order under it. Whatever is behind the crop formations seem to want to make people focus on fractals as being one of the keys to whatever this is about. And here we sit in September of 2003 with some astonishing crop formations this year, but not just in England. Some of the most amazing have been in the United States and Canada and Italy. And Italy had 16 patterns in the summer of 2003, and in all of the years before, Italy never had anything but a couple of circles. Why is it that the phenomena seemed in 2003 to branch out in a significant way beyond England? Germany had tremendous numbers of patterns. But in the United States, I think it's significant that this was a year in which the media in the United States hardly covered anything. And yet, month after month, patterns were being reported, ranging from Maryland and New Jersey all the way to Louisiana, up through the central states of the United States, up to Michigan and Wisconsin, all the way to California. And it was not as if the media itself would be responsible for any of these reports. They were being reported on little local levels. It was very difficult to track down where all these patterns in the United States were occurring and when, and often by the time people like myself, an investigative reporter, would finally have somebody send me a little tiny newspaper story about what had happened in a tiny little place in Louisiana, the field, whatever was there, was either had been harvested or nobody had gotten any photographs. And this was an amazing year, with there being some outstanding exceptions to this. And you may have heard about the Serpent Mound, Ohio formation that was reported on August 24th.
Yes, actually I heard about it on Whitley Strieber's show.
Which I reported on.
Exactly.
This is, to me, one of the most interesting. I'm looking at a photograph at my website, earthfiles.com. When you look at the aerials, one of the things that hit some of us who had been in England was how similar it seemed to be to the Morgan's Hill formation that occurred in early August in England. And Morgan's Hill, that pattern had tremendous geometry discoveries in it, and it turned out that the Morgan's Hill in England lined up precisely right through the center of the four ancient barrows that had the big 11 concentric rings that made the fifth, we'll call it burial mound, but it was a formation in Barley this year, one of the most amazing formations I've ever been in. It was mind-boggling. And that line going through those barrows and that formation went right through the Avebury Truslow Circle Center, went right on to Liddington Castle at the far end, and ended up at Oliver's Castle at the other far end, and making a lot of us sit up and say, wow, this is not an accident. This is on purpose. And the same thing applies to what happened in the United States. This 271-foot-long formation that at first seemed similar to Morgan's Hill, it turns out that it is not. When they started started studying the geometry of it in relationship to the 2,000-year-old Serpent Mound, which is another major mystery in the United States. Who or what built these large, gigantic, half-mile-long hillside structures with such perfect geometries 2,000 years ago here, that there's so many of them in the area of what is known as Chillicothe, Ohio. And they are a huge earth mystery, patterns again on the ground. Why, on August 24th of 2003, why was this extremely strange series of circles and crescents and rings put down approximately 1/2 mile from the Serpent Mound with an alignment that took the center of the formation in the soybeans right to the center of the coiled tail on the serpent? These are the kinds of land relationships that we have been discovering this year of 2003 more than we have in the past. Why this occurred, I do not know, but the Serpent Mound Formation in Ohio, according to Jeffrey Wilson and Roger Sugden and Ted Robertson, who went in on the ground and up in the air to see this and photograph it, they've been in over, Jeff has been in over 100 crop formations in the United States over the past few years. He uses magnetometers, he uses electric field measuring devices, he uses magnets to drag the soil. He studies and collects for Levengood and others from the plants and the soil. They use compasses. They do a wide range of tests. He said this is the first formation ever, the Serpent Mound in Ohio, in which every single test had anomalous results. No one doubts that whatever came down at the Serpent Mound in Ohio and was first seen on August 24th is truly mysterious, huge, and what does it mean?
Could it be, when I was in Wiltshire, I talked to a gentleman who was studying ley lines and earth serpents, as he called them. And he said that that crop circles seem to attract those energetic flows within the planet. Could it be that maybe the purpose for some of the crop circles is not so much communication to humans, but actually a direct communication to the earth, or maybe by changing something in the environment to have an indirect communication then again to humans?
That's another really excellent question that several of us have kicked around the last 10 years. Could the formations really not have any desire to communicate directly with humans? Never have and never will. And if not, then what could their purpose be? And in addition to what you've just described, I think it would be fun to share with you one of the most interesting conversations that I ever had with somebody who was definitely working for the United States government in an intelligence capacity, and this was in 1993. And without going into all the details about how I came to talk with this person, let me just relate to you what he told me. He said that the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States had been working with large Cray computers, trying to feed in satellite images of crop formations from around the world and do so in a chronological order as they appeared. Because what they were looking for was the possibility of an encoded mathematical language that they could crack, just like the United States cracked the Japanese code in World War II. And he said, we have begun to suspect that what we are dealing with are time travelers. And for the purposes of this program, to keep the ideas very short, he went on to explain that some people in the United States government were wondering if they were dealing with us or a timeline from a distant future that had run into survival problems and was trying to come back in time to try to change something on a timeline, and that they were using the cereal crops of the planet as markers to gauge how effective that they were in their efforts to change timelines. Well, see, you and I are the outsiders of this kind of discussion and knowledge. We don't have any first-hand information. So what I'm relating was a very interesting discussion by a man who was working for the United States government in 1993, was in England specifically to study crop formations, and that's what he said to me. But I don't have any independent verifying knowledge. And Robert van der Broeke has told investigators, he doesn't speak any English, so it's a Dutch to English translation. But when he was asked, what are these lights that you've seen crops go down and they surrounded you on your bicycle, he said, they're angels. And when people said, well, why are they here? He said, because there are great problems on this planet, and the lights behind the crop formations are trying to create an antidote to deception on this planet, and that much was wrong with our environment, and that whatever was behind the crop formations was trying somehow to repair some of the environmental damage.
When you say antidote, I also heard that there are two groups there, yin and the yang, and is there evidence, or do you think there's evidence that there are two rivaling, or maybe more than two rivaling groups that do those crop circles?
In my book, Mysterious Lights in Crop Circles, the new second edition came out just a few months ago. This was one of the sub-themes in my book, that over the past 11 years, since I was first in a crop formation in England in 1992, that as each year went by and as many times as I've been in the fields, I've always had a strong sense that going into some patterns, they felt tremendously energetic and positive, and other patterns did not. And people studying the geometry, sometimes two patterns would come down in the same field of completely different nature and mathematical relationship. And there have been patterns in which people thought, for example, one that was near Allington in Wiltshire in 1999, people assumed that it was the old Antakarana symbol that had been used in Tibet as an ancient healing symbol. And I was working on Mysterious Lights in Crop Circles, and I had a graphic from a book about the actual Antakarana symbol. And I was working on the page in my book to describe the crop formation in Allington as being an Antakarana. And when I picked up the photo, and on one hand, and I've got the actual Antakarana symbol in my other hand, I'm saying these don't match. And the only way that I could get either one of them to match was to put one of them in front of a mirror. And so what I came to realize and wrote about in Mysterious Lights in Crop Circles is that the symbol in Allington in 1999 was the opposite of the ancient symbol that had always been used to heal. And I raised the question in my book. People jumped to the assumption that the symbol was one thing when it was not. There was an insidious quality about the idea that something would be made to look so perfectly a match, but was the opposite, and was the intent to put a symbol on the surface of this planet that would be the opposite of positive healing. And if so, what are we dealing with? Who is playing this chess game? How many point-counterpoint moves are there? Are we dealing with negative versus positive influences, both working through patterns that are laid on the surface of this planet, just like the ancient magicians in the Arabic world 5,000 years ago? used white and black magic to summon forces from the unseen? I don't know for sure what the answer is, but these definitely are questions that need to be asked.
In your book, Mysterious Lights on Crop Circles, I have the first edition. I read it. You also show that the landscape and the history of Wiltshire and Somerset, where most of those crop circles appear, is very interesting. And you also now told us that in Ohio there seems to be where those crop circles cropped up. It is a very interesting landscape, and the history is very interesting. Do you think that there is a connection?
I think that whatever the intellectual profile is that Gerald Hawkins used that phrase, or the angelic energies, as Robert Vanderbroeke calls them, whatever the intelligence is that's behind the truly mysterious formations, I think it has great knowledge about our most ancient past, and that there is something about what is happening on the planet now that has something to do with reminding us about things we have forgotten, because maybe the future of this planet is dependent upon humans waking up.
So we're almost at the end of this show here. One question I would like to ask you is, where do you think the whole phenomena is going to evolve in the coming years? Or what do you think that will it go on, and will it produce more spectacular patterns, or what do you think the whole phenomena is up to, so to say?
I don't know. I wish I did know the answer, but I'll tell you, it will be the saddest day for me and for several of us who have been drawn to the crop formations wherever they have appeared, who, in the presence of some of the patterns, have felt like that we were close to some kind of a profound force in this universe, and that whatever the intelligence is behind the crop patterns, if it decides to leave this humanity without ever explaining, without us ever knowing what all these patterns were about and why, for a period of time, someone went to the time and the trouble to put all these patterns around the planet, provoking us, making us seek things outside of our tiny little realms of knowledge, expanding our minds, forcing us to walk paths that we have never walked before, for that to leave would be very sad.
Yeah, for sure. And, well, there are so many other things we wanted to talk about today. Maybe we can just briefly touch on your research that you do in Brazil. Maybe you could just give us a brief, tell us about what happened with those cattle mutilations in the last weeks.
Well, let's see. There's a lot of subjects here. Brazil is one subject, and animal mutilations is another. And the Brazil research, that has to do with the farmer Uringer Oliveira, who lives in a place called Corguinho in Mato Grosso do Sul. That is the big cattle-raising state in Brazil. And Corguinho, having been there for 2 weeks in February of this year, is a place that when you talk with the farmers who have lived there around this big mesa that dominates Corguinho, you hear all kinds of stories about small, mysterious lights that farmers have seen come up out of the ground. That's what they say. Yes, it comes right out of the soil. And that they fly around in the air, and that they have seen these lights go into the mesa and come back out. And listening to the farmers, I thought, this sounds just like Hessdalen. This sounds just like the Vale of Pusey in Wiltshire. This is another one of those remarkable places on the face of the earth where anomalies, for reasons that are not clear but may have something to do with the geology, because Corguinho is so rich with iron and minerals, that the entire landscape is red, solid red, with green, vibrant trees and green birds and all of this red soil. In these places where anomalies seem to occur, it may be that it is the very geology of our planet, like the limestone with all the water under it in England and in Germany, like all of the iron and sulfur and copper and quartz-filled mountains of Hessdalen, like all of the iron and mineral-rich soil of Corguinho, that these are places where something in the unseen can come and interact. And I would just say for your listeners, because today we're running out of time, and I would be happy to come back and do another program with you about these other subjects in depth, that when it comes to Brazil and phenomena there, that from my point of view as an investigative reporter, eyewitnesses, when there are many eyewitnesses to events such as mysterious lights, I think that all of us have to keep an open mind and seriously consider that phenomena is happening somewhere on this planet every day to someone, even if it doesn't make our local 6 o'clock news. And that's what I'm trying to do at earthfiles.com, my website, www.earthfiles.com. I am trying to keep, in the most credible way possible, working with scientists, bringing Earth mysteries that are not on the 6 o'clock news, but may be extremely important in the future yet to come on our planet.
Yeah, I have linked up your website, of course, to my website, and I have to say it's one of the best websites in this regard in the whole internet. And well, Linda, I'm terribly sorry that we had those technical problems today, but I would be very happy if we could indeed repeat this and talk about all those other subjects which seem to be related all together in a certain way. And thank you very much for coming, and I would be more than happy to have you back on my show sometime in the future.
Oh, Tarek, I would love to do it, and so let's just see if we can schedule another program, and thank you very much for inviting me to be with you today.
Okay, Linda, thank you very much too, and I will, let's stay in touch via email or via phone.
All right.
Okay. Ja, das war jetzt also Linda Moulton Howe, live aus Philadelphia. Leider hatten wir leichte Probleme mit der Technik hier heute. Ich hoffe, dass bei der nächsten Sendung mit Linda das Ganze ein bisschen besser hinhaut. Wie es halt so will, gerade dann, wenn man so einen großartigen Gast auf Sendung hat, dann haut halt irgendwas nicht hin. Aber wir haben es trotzdem noch irgendwie hinbekommen. Mir bleibt eigentlich nichts mehr anderes zu sagen, als ich bedanke mich bei allen fürs Zuhören. Die nächste Sendung wird am 8. November stattfinden. Vielen Dank und bis zum nächsten Mal.